Okay, so for my final project with the unit plan and lesson plan component, I'd really like to be able to dive deeper into the world of female composers. I'd really like to explore kind of who they are, more than just a sentence or a paragraph that you can easily find, and kind of see what they brought to the world of composition. I chose this topic because there's a real lack of any type of female and minority representation in music history resources. I think across the board there is a big lack of representation for these two groups, but especially when looking at the middle school and high school level material, it seems to be more of a focus on, Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and what they did to get us to where we are today, but they don't really focus on the other people involved in music history. We just finished the Romantic era in my Music Focus 1 courses, and one of my students, we studied Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, and one of my students asked me if there were no other female composers between Hildegard from the medieval period and Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel from the Romantic period. And I think that's kind of that conversation really spurred my interest in female composers, because I know that they were out there. They just don't happen to be in a lot of the resources that teachers use for the middle school and high school level courses. So these are the two books that I currently use and as my kind of home base, tried and true music history books. They're excellent resources. They're kind of in between a middle school and high school level, so they fit really well with my freshmen, and they do a nice job about giving, information and a good listening example with background information on that and a little quiz at the end. But my one complaint is that they don't have enough female or minority composers in them. In fact, there's like two female composers and I think one of a minority, which is kind of problematic, especially in today's society. So I found this book, Women Composers, The Lost Tradition Found. I inherited this book, it was in my office when I got my job, and I've kind of been struggling with a way to really work it into the music history resources, but since I already have the book, I thought, okay, maybe I should look deeper into this book and really see what it has to offer to me. Okay, so these are a list of female composers that the book focuses on. So it divides them by periods. So in the medieval and Baroque period, obviously we have people like Hildegard, who we've already studied, but there are other female composers from that time period that I did not know that existed and would be curious to know more information on, as well as some classical, some romantic, and then I was especially into the romantic into 20th century because those are more current composers that the kids, they don't necessarily always know them, but for example, the sisters, Lily and Nadine, sometimes articles surface on social media about those ladies or in the news feed on like Apple News about those two. So they're kind of more household names than not household names. And then there's a section on living composers. These composers were born in the 20s and 30s. The book's a little bit older, so I would have to continue on with more current living composers. But I just thought this book was a really great way to start off. It has some text about each of the composers. It has good listening examples and a little bit of background on those listening examples, which I really like presenting to the kids before we do the listening activity. Okay, so for my Music Focus 1, again, this is a freshman course, so I have to keep that in mind, so they're not as familiar with looking at big music like my upperclassmen are. So we would do music history presentations and projects like we do with our music history anyways. We would look at the history and major works of one female composer from each era. I put an example here for Clara Schumann, look at kind of who she is, what she did, and then a listening example. Maybe something like Nocturne in F major. It's a pretty well-known piece. My kids always love telling me that they have heard some of the classical and romantic music on shows like Little Einsteins and things like that. So I try to keep it safe to a point where they might have heard it before and it kind of rings a bell in their mind. Then we could talk about some classroom discussions, like why are there more male composers than females? What would the hardships be with their choice to compose? And things like that. For their project, this would be a group presentation on female composers. Students would do these in their regular groups. The projects would include what do they believe the struggles were and are for female composers. Students will pick their top 3 female composers to present about their lives, historical contributions, and to present an audio recording of a major work that they enjoy. For music focus 2 through 4, we would be more so focused on music analysis versus music history. Our goal would be 1 composer from each era, or maybe 3 or 4 total, depending on the timing of this unit. Study the history, followed by really analyzing a work of music by them. For example, if we chose to do Fandy Mendelssohn Hensel, we might do the string quartet in E-flat major, learn about a little history behind the quartet, and do an analysis of the piece. For a project, they would be doing individual presentations of female composers of their choice. They would find a credible female composer, either from the list provided or on their own, researching the history and works of this composer, and presenting this as well as a specific piece that they have found interesting. So, absolutely a musical recording of the piece, and then we could look at doing either an individual musical analysis of it or a group musical analysis of it. To add another level to this, I may challenge them to get away from white women and focus more on a minority female composer. So those are my ideas.